But where's the world? We have Janie JK from Holland.
Okay.
Hi, hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Jer. Please excuse the video quality. I'm a dum-dum and I had a problem with my memory card, so we're recording from the iPhone today. Drag Race UK versus the World Season 1 is a discombobulated hodgepodge mess of a season from start to finish. From the downright suspicious judging to the overworked story editing of pinning Blue and Mo as the initial front runners and storyline havers of the entire season, down to the lousy challenge layout and runway briefs. This cluster cuss of a season is so frustrating to watch in retrospect. But this could and should have been such a Drag Race success story because for the first time ever, all of the franchises were colliding with each other. They were all being brought to the same stage to see which queens had the guts to do what needed to be done in an all-stars level competition. Making decisions about people they only incidentally knew from having the RuPaul brand stamped onto their name. Playing the game well, not only for the challenges, but also the social aspect, and prove that they were the best representative of their home country. But it wasn't a success story at all. In fact, I think it was kind of a disappointment, not only for fans, but also for contestants of this season, as most of them speak very poorly about this season anytime it's brought up. This season is so bad that it almost makes All Stars 1 look like a joyous treat, and that's crazy. In each iteration of Drag Race All Stars, a cast of queens are selected not only for their merit, but on their story potential for a second go-around. Each cast list is hand-selected to tell a story, provide a redemption arc for their initial time on the show. These queens have something to prove from those who got to the very end but just barely didn't make it. Queens who went home on challenges that they really should have succeeded in. Queens like Trixie, who went home during a comedy challenge, and Thorgy during a smack-talking speaking challenge. Queens who managed to capture the camera's attention, but not a lot of wins. Queens who had something desperately to prove from the last time they were on. And hey, Mayhem was cast too. So when we scroll over to this first season of Versus the World, the reality is that the stakes aren't actually there. Not really, and neither is the story. And neither is the world. We have the Americans, Jujubee, who has never really been much of a story device girly. She's the comic relief, the tension cutter, the one who has the shady, silly remarks, but doesn't provide a lot more to the competition than just being funny and iconic. And maybe that's enough for a mainline season, but for All Stars, you have to bring a little bit more. Mo, who in a similar vein is a fierce contestant who loves Jesus and God and drag and mixing those things together, but doesn't bring a great variety of storyline to any of her 3 seasons she's been on. Besides the fact that they both seem kind of strong-armed into this competition, as they both had no energy all season. They seemed like they wanted to be literally anywhere else than there. The UK queens were an odd assortment as well. Blue was someone who was unjustly sniped out of the competition the first time around when it probably should have been bag of chips. And she had interesting social media presence off the show that didn't really translate to Versus the World, or really to season 1 either. Baga was the silly camp girl who was lovable as hell her first go around, but came back and had almost a polar opposite TV presence than the first time, to a point that it felt like a betrayal. Who is this bag of chips, and why is she so much of a diva than what we saw the first time? There's no way that much has changed in a year and a half. Very similar to Latrice Royale in All Stars 4, who came back and was kind of unlikable. Their edits were so jarring from their original runs that their behavior feels like a betrayal to the audience members' feelings, as well as the memories that they had of them, and almost damages the clout that they had going into the season. Finally, we have Cheryl, arguably the most snubbed of her season, who had great TV presence, did well in challenges, as she was good at not only acting but dancing and improv and comedy. But ultimately, she was overshadowed by Viv and Davina, who were dominating that competition. When evaluating great All-Stars picks, they either need to have a redemptive moment from their original season, or they were so close to the end that they have to give it one more go to try again. And of the UK picks this season, I feel like Cheryl may have met the criteria better than Baga and Blue. Cheryl was the one who was most in need of a redemption. But if anybody deserved a chance from that season, it was Davina DeCampo, as Baga rightfully lost that season multiple times. And for a good All-Stars pick, You need to have a strong redemptive moment. And I don't know if Baga needed that. Her fame had exceeded her expectations off the show, as she was the most famous woman in Britain. And Davina did arguably get very close to winning that season and deserved a redemption maybe more than any of those three that were cast in this season. Shifting over to Canada, we had represented Jimbo, who many feel was unjustly eliminated in the competition. And I'm talking about Canada season 1, not in UK. Because Jimbo objectively was doing better than Rita Baga, who was actually and actively getting a producer push to the finale. There were times where Rita was not the strongest in the room, but was given a win, or was handed a safe placement when maybe it should have been a low. Where Jimbo was definitely under more direct scrutiny from the judges panel for her performance as well as her looks on the runway and her presentation of those looks. Lemon made sense to me because she went home in something that should have been easy for her to do, which was branding herself. The makeover challenge is not only designing and showing off your aesthetic, but it's also your brand stamp. How well do you translate what you do onto someone else? And Lemon had been doing a great job of that all season, but flubbed in the one challenge that shows that off the best. And Lemon's biggest opponent that entire season was her own budget. And that's ultimately what took her out. The looks just were not matching the personality. And then of course we have The World, Janie Jacquet from Drag Race Holland, one of my personal favorites from that season because she is so cunty. But I'm not sure if Janie was the ultimate hard hitter from Drag Race Holland. Certainly not from season 1. I may be biased towards Janie Jacquet and I may love everything she does, but of that entire group, Cedergine was the hardest hitter. And was, I think, arguably snuffed out early because of Fred's bad judgment. Maybe that Kermit Miss Piggy look was rotten, but there were far worse presentations during the Snatch Game than what Cedergine did. I think Janie's iconic, but she was all out ignored in Drag Race UK versus The World. Her storyline was muddled. It was like the editors knew she wasn't an endgame player, so they actively sabotaged any chance that she got critiques or information from Rue by panning over to somebody else or cutting her time short. She seemed so off of production radar that they weren't even noticing her. And that's not Janie's fault, but I don't think Janie gives a lot to TV for them to pull off of. And we saw that in Holland 1. She's a fierce competitor, but she's not great television, whereas someone like Cedergine is. Finally, we have Pangina, who's honestly the biggest head scratcher of this entire season. Bringing a host into a competitive setting is kind of a big question mark for me because a host is going to evaluate the competition from the other side of the desk. They're going to take the deliberation into a completely different direction than competitors who have been on the show already and have been on that side of the camera. In addition to that, it also kind of diminishes her authority as a host in Thailand. You would never catch Supreme or Priscilla, Fred, or even Art subjecting themselves to the scrutiny of the judges panel, specifically of Rue and Michelle, people who are actually peers in their field. Hell, I don't think we'd see Nikki, Rita, or even Brooke ever come back to do an all-star season because that would completely rip apart their authority that they've already built as hosts off the show. It takes a lot of branding to move yourself in the direction from competitor to authority figure. And someone like Pangina bringing herself from authority figure to competitor and doing well, but showing a very different side to her makes her less plugged in. On top of the fact that most of her thought process is going to get cut out by the edit. So whatever her actual reason was for eliminating Jimbo, whether that was because she thought she was objectively the weakest or didn't provide a certain level of entertainment to TV or a certain level to her runway package, that's going to ultimately get cut out. And we will not get to see that in the same way that we would if Pangina was judging the whole thing. Pangina's deliberation process, in my opinion, seems very pointed from a host perspective. And me, having watched Thailand 2 and 3, knows that Pangina's deliberation is suspicious. It often doesn't make sense and is slightly confusing why Pangina gravitates towards certain queens and recoils from others. And her being from the other side of the camera made her stand out like a sore thumb in a way that I don't think she was prepared to be perceived from those fellow contestants. Pangina, like many others in this season, had almost no actual storyline, which is again the fault of production, but I can't help but wonder how much Pangina was holding back. She was excited to be there and was holding the weight of Thailand on her, and you can see how much that devastated her when she was eliminated. But what was she actively bringing to the competition that people like Cheryl were, or people like even Blue was trying really hard to do? Or even Mo, who as disconnected as she was there to prove that she was still that girl and trying to make the rebrand really stick. So we have this entirely weird casting, which is not exactly the best representation of the world, gestures vaguely. And there was such little story presentation through the entire season. And when I talk about story, some of y'all might be wondering, what does that mean? So we scroll over to All Stars 4, which is a great example of this, where we have Valentina and Pheromone, who had their conflict in season 9, and their friendship is brought to yet another season where it's tested. Have they grown? Have they matured? Do they respect each other? Do they find each other's drag interesting and valid? Where we see Farrah really rallying behind Valentina, but Valentina doesn't rally behind Farrah. Latrilla, who is trying almost to their detriment to prove that they are two individuals and not a team anymore. Naomi, proving that she is not just this nice, kind girl from season 8, that she is a competitor. There's storyline actively built behind each one of these characters and their motivations for coming to Drag Race, where a lot of the girls in UK versus the World 1 were just there to be there. At the time of this filming, there were a grand total of 5 seasons that had already aired. And that was Drag Race US, Drag Race Thailand, Drag Race UK, Canada's Drag Race, and Drag Race Holland. I want to say it like Fred every time and go, Holland. Theoretically, Drag Race Down Under and Drag Race España were in their early airing, and Drag Race Italia would have been right around the time of pre-production. Canada 2, UK 3 were right in the tail end of probably being announced, and Holland 2 was probably just wrapping up. The optics of excluding España and Down Under, even if it was impossible to actually cast them at the time, wasn't a great look for this first season of A Versus the World, and didn't exactly paint a great picture of what we were going to expect, because it didn't include what we were perceiving at the time as the world. On top of some somewhat mediocre choices of contestants to represent each country. To me, it comes across like they didn't trust that this was going to do very well, so they didn't want to make a lot of big risks. They pulled in fan favorites like Jujubee, like Bag of Chips, like Janie Jacquet, who was probably the most accessible to the globe, and just hoped that that would be enough, when it really wasn't. To top off this shitty cake with even shittier icing, this season was then landlocked into the UK, securing that these girls were not going to get paid a dime. It was the easiest way to save money and muscle in these girls to show up and get onto a new contract so that they could use them for whatever they wanted to for the next 5 years, and also not have to pay anything to them, which feels bad. They put zero stock into the success of these queens and just put them out in front of the world and hoped that they would be strong enough and that their star power would be strong enough to elevate this season out of the gutters that it was already placed in. Rue used to say in the mainline seasons that Drag Race is the Olympics of drag, but this had every potential to be the actual Olympics of drag. And I don't want to just complain, so I've gone ahead and fixed the season to what it could and should have been. To the notes! First off, there's absolutely zero reason why this season could not have just been held in LA. Besides the fact that it would have been easier to film literally everything, it also would have granted the ability to give a cash prize at the end rather than just some rinky-dink cover of a song with RuPaul, which is not a prize, that feels like a punishment. And it would have guaranteed sponsorship prizes to propel the mini challenges and the maxis to actually feel substantial. There would have been lip sync money wins. And it would have actually felt like the ultimate competition SmackDown. Waving a magic wand, what I would do is halt production for like 2 or 3 months. I don't think there was any reason that this needed to be filmed directly after Drag Race UK Season 3. We could have maybe done Season 14 and filmed that, and then filmed Versus the World here in the States. And what an extra 2 or 3 months would have done is allowed España to finish airing, it would have allowed Down Under to finish airing, and it also would have presented an opportunity where Holland 2 could have finished airing. And then we could bring queens from those franchises into the fold to really expand out the world representation. I also think that the size of just 9 is way too small for something that should have been a celebration of drag and a celebration of the globe all coming together for the first time ever. And it would have felt like a proper Olympian season in my opinion. So while I understand Jujubee's presence, because I mean, she is Drag Race history, going all the way back to the old school, I think that she was the wrong pick. Again, for storyline potential because she had very little to give, and she quite literally had nothing to prove after All Stars 5. She made a brilliant last impression there, and this impression on UK versus the World kind of soured that. The series does need someone from the old school, I will give it that. It needs an early half of Drag Race to bring in some of that proper clout to draw in audiences so that they care. Because likely, most Drag Race fans haven't gone ahead and watched the international seasons, even though they really should have. Couple queens come to mind, specifically Coco Montrese and Dito Ritz. Coco's someone who had buckets of storyline potential, from being a Miss America, going into All Stars 2 and getting overshadowed by Relaska talks and not being allowed to progress through the competition. In Season 5, being overshadowed by her story with Alyssa. So this time it would have been a great opportunity to show what she could have done outside of all of her friends being there and casting a pall of darkness over her trajectory. And it would have shown that she was outside of that external drama that was happening on the show. I think Dita is still kind of regarded as one of those queens with the most iconic lip syncs of all time. She has a redemptive story that makes great for an all-stars season, but maybe she wouldn't play too well with people from some of these hard-hitting seasons who would have budgets like crazy, where Dita might be at a disadvantage. So putting her at Versus the World kind of levels out the playing field so that everyone would be at a more even level of drag rather than these multi-$100,000 packages that they go into the show already with now for all-stars. Because they're sort of hinging their career on doing well, and then they get bookings to make up for the debt they put themselves into. And so I think either one of these divas would have been stronger for the first international season. I think for clout purposes, I would have maybe picked Coco, because she, I think, makes a bigger splash, because the Drag Race Vegas show was just kind of starting to get off the ground. Coco was gaining some traction among fans globally from that. People actually paying attention to her outside of the drama of her and Alyssa and her and Relaska talks. I think she would have made bigger waves on the show, and I think that this would have been a good Drag Race rebrand for her to show who Coco Montrese is now, rather than who she was on All Stars 2. And then besides a very needed early Queen season, I think the show needed someone from the more recent years. And in my opinion, basically anybody from season 12 or 13 would have been good choices to bring in. Any of those queens would have been a little more plugged into the desire of being there over Mo, who seemed kind of over it the entire time, and that she wanted to be literally anywhere else but that set of Versus the World. Then from Thailand, this was the official first Drag Race International season, and I have been informed that Miss Annie Mae Wong would have been the girly to pull in from season 1. Unfortunately, I've only perceived season 2 and 3. Season 2 happened before Versus the World happened, so I can only attest to the talents of people like Vanda Miss Joachim, who I think got snubbed from the finale due to favoritism of 2 queens that did not deserve to go to the finale because they had both already been eliminated, and that should have factored into the finale in general. I think she had a good storyline in her original season about her body image, about how she perceived herself and how she would overcome that through the season, and her own insecurities would often get in her way, but she would always try to overcome them. I think that would have been some great representation from Thailand, because she does represent this glam side of Thai drag. I think Vanda has a global sensibility about her drag, and that would have been good to see. Another great representation I think would have been Jeannie, because this is someone who had an immaculate run on this show. Probably some of my favorite looks on the main stage of all time, including that rainy look where she was dressed up as a cloud and just looked so hot. And she was just unable to perform in a lip sync because she didn't, quite frankly, know the Thai language that well. And that caused her to flounder. I think she's got a strong redemption arc behind her. Certainly, Annie, Vanda, Jeannie would have been stronger representations, more than the host, who deserved to have her hosting credibility maintained, rather than to be dragged down and become a crying meme for all of time and space to think about during that Let the Music Play where they disrespected her so badly. From Canada, I am a really big fan of Lemon and her trajectory on season 1 and what she did off of it. I understand why Jimbo was selected, even if I don't necessarily connect with her drag that much. I think the ultimate selection from Canada would have been Scarlett Bobo, because she was criminally underlooked throughout her entire season, to the point where her only challenge win happened when Michelle Visage was there on set. And I think that says something. She is almost like an Alaska or a Ginger to me, someone who would come to an all-star season who had gotten so close to the win by being so good. But she also had the redemption potential like someone like Kennedy or Dela had in All-Stars 3. I reference those 4 queens because they were such great candidates to bring into an all-star season. And Bobo had that exact same potential. I think she's genuinely a competitive beast and is a great representation of Canada. And on top of the factors I already mentioned, I do think that you need to be a competitive monster to show up in a versus the world or an all-star scenario. And Jimbo and Bobo would have been, I think, the strongest picks from this group to represent Canada, because Gia and Kendall were not available for casting at this time. And I think that those two would have also been great if this had been maybe like a year later. From Holland, I already mentioned, I love Janie Jacquet and I'm an apologist for her. I just don't see her as a competitive beast or a storyline device in a way that I see someone like Setter Jean or even freaking Chelsea Boy, who is a competitive monster. And I think both Rue and Michelle would eat up Chelsea Boy and what they did on Holland. I think that they would have connected with Rue in a more impactful way than Janie ever did, because it was very clear that she did not connect with RuPaul. And while neither Chelsea or Setter Jean made it to the finale, I think that was entirely on Fred, because Fred wasn't a great judge. Fred is a great TV host, terrible judge. And I mentioned wanting to let the Holland 2 cycle through, and that was purely because I wanted to either see Kita or My Little Pony in this very first season. I know that Kita Minaj was a little bit of a head scratcher in Versus the World 2, but she was still pretty competitively strong, and I think either one of them could have been brought into this season. And I think that they have the kind of same story potential as someone like Cheryl and Jimbo. They bring a strong sense of Holland drag to the competition, and I think they're a little more US accessible in the same way that someone like Janie is. And then from the UK, I think it's obvious from my earlier commentary that I really don't believe that Blue and Baga were the strongest competition to bring in from their seasons. I think that Baga brings in a level of clout that was needed for a original Versus the World season, but I think that Davina would have been an even stronger choice because of her clout potential, because of her storyline potential, because of her redemption arc, and I think she would have been a stronger choice for those reasons. And I do think it's a big eyebrow raise that season 2 was completely non-represented in this season, because it was already aired and done. Tace or Ahura could have been involved in this, and I think if this project had happened in the US, either one of them may have said yes. I have a feeling that they would both be a little averse to doing another UK season because there's no money involved in that. Maybe now they might, since they are giving cash prizes in the UK. And since I'm removing this from the UK, I really only want 2 queens. I don't want this to be a US versus the world or whatever. I just want this to be Drag Race versus the world, where everybody is seen and given a spotlight in a bulky amount of queens, or as best as we can. So I would have brought in Cheryl and Tace because I think they have the UK sensibility that shows off UK drag, their specific areas and types of drag. They're both dancing queens, but are very different at different things. They both struggle in sewing, but they are so charismatic that you almost forgive it. I think they were both overshadowed quite a bit by stronger competition, and I think that they have a global sensibility, good storyline, good redemption potential. I think that the two of them would have been a better representation for the UK than Bago or Blue were. And then Down Under was very likely just dropping as this season went into its casting, which is unfortunate because I think that Anita would have been a great person to pull in for this first season. I think that she would have had even more synergy with this group than she did in Canada too. Like, just picture the original casting. Anita is very similar to queens like Janie and Baga. She's sort of this like middle ground between them. If there's a Venn diagram actually of Janie, Baga, and Juju, Anita is kind of right in the middle, and I think she would have drawn out some interesting energy from here and maybe even drawn out a little bit of that chaos from Jimbo. I think that she would have made really good headway into the competition, maybe even making it to the end. And I think, honestly, she would have been a great 10th person to add into this. Her entire story on season 1 was kind of about how she was second fiddle to Kita, and her run ended before they ever got to have a good showdown with each other. So this would have been an opportunity for her to show what her drag is like without her best friend being there, without her business partner being there, being able to just showcase her. Her infectious positive energy, I think, would have been a really great foil to someone like Jimbo, who was playing the game in such a powerful and nonsensical way. Now, I want 2 queens from each franchise if I can, but then we're getting a little out of pocket. I would have loved to have seen Art here as well. Like, Art and Anita would have been great, but I think maybe just one representative from Down Under is appropriate because this season was just kind of rancid. And then finally, the most recent season in this precise timeline would have been España 1. And I think either Inti or Ugasio would have been great representatives from España. I think Arantxa is great, and I loved her in season 2 of UK versus the World, but she definitely needed some time to cook and figure things out. Inti is a queen who walked out and had a lot of tension surrounding her exit, and I think that is deserving of a redemptive storyline in and of itself, that she is more than what her inner saboteur was at that time. She has buckets of redemption potential. In the same way that I think Lemon did. Her biggest enemy was her own budget at the time, and I think it would have been nice to have seen her here with someone like Lemon. It would have been nice to have seen her in general. With the cast here though, I would love to have Ugasio because I do think that they are a great representation of Spanish drag. I think they are kind of in the same vein as someone like Chelsea Boy, but my only concern and question mark is I don't think Ugasio speaks any English, so that would kind of be something that would hold her back, where I do believe that Inti does and would be able to make it through a season like this. So let's do final casting calls. Who I would have represented on the global level. We have Coco Montrese, Heidi in Closet, Jimbo, Scarlett Bobo, Vanda Miss Joachim, Jeannie Setter Jean, Kita Minaj, Cheryl Hole, Taste and Anita Wiglet, and then finally Inti. This brings our cast out to 12, which I feel like is a significantly larger representation of the world. It's got extremely talented, hard-hitting queens, each with something to prove from their season, that they were their own saboteur, or the suspicious judging was their saboteur. Maybe somebody overshadowed them just slightly. I think this group is a little more even, with queens like Coco and Anita having similar storylines of being second fiddle to someone else. Heidi and Cheryl being victims of costuming over performance. Jimbo and Jeannie being weaker lip syncers, but having so many other strengths in other areas that it almost kind of makes up for how bad of performers they are. Bobo and Vanda being endgame focused, but getting in their own way many times throughout the competition and trying to overcome their individual insecurities, but not always doing that the most successfully. And then Tace and Kita getting so close to the end, but just barely missing out because someone else was getting pushed harder than them. And then Inti and Setter Jean, who were really their own worst enemies and got in their own way multiple times. I think in this casting, the world would have been better celebrated and represented. And I think this could have been the Olympics of drag in a way that UK versus the World Season 1 was just simply not. I think the girls of the original cast, quite frankly, deserved better than what they got. Better challenges, better runways, better edits. They were lobbed all this garbage and dysfunction and kind of just expected to make it work and figure it out. And I don't think that's fair to any of them who already went through that the first time and then had to come back and get an even worse round of it a second time. And I think they deserved more credit and certainly some financial compensation for having to make snap decisions about people they only incidentally knew about. Maybe some queens had watched each other's seasons, but I doubt the bulk of them knew anything about each other. What their potential was, or what they could have done, what they did their first time around, and how that had shifted into this competition. Queens like Pangina, again coming from the other side of the camera, and looking at the competition in very likely a completely different way than the others in the room. And I think this season was unsuccessful because of the lousy production that went into it on the ground and in post-production. If you're interested in seeing how this season could have played out, I am in fact going to do a Drag Race simulator for this, so keep an eye out, maybe tomorrow or the following day for that, and you can check that out and tell me what you think. What did you think about this original season of UK versus the World? Did you live? Did you laugh? Did you love? Did you hate it? What do you think was the ultimate problem? And who would you have cast from all of these seasons of Drag Race that had been out up until this point to make it more world friendly? We just reviewed all 6 episodes on my Drag Race podcast, so if you would like to go check that out, it is under That Sounds Gay, wherever you find your podcasts. But also there is a slightly visual podcast here on YouTube that you can also pull up and listen to our thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and in the meantime, I will see y'all on the flip.